They did Inferno in one episode. They did Inferno in one episode. Ugh! I understand that the average person watching this probably has no idea about the Inferno story arc in X-Men. There was such a build-up. Madeline Pryor was a major character in the X-Men universe for quite some time after Jean Grey died. The build-up of the relationship between Scott and Madeline was huge. Jean Grey returning from the dead and throwing off everybody's dynamic, then falling into Madeline Pryor learning that she was a clone and losing her mind, the way this connects with a bunch of other stuff, and the fact that the story was told over months and the Madeline Pryor story told over years, and then one episode, just one freaking episode. And there's so much other little minutia stuff. God! Ugh! Taking one of the coolest arcs and compressing it into one episode is kind of crossing the line with me. I knew this show would probably piss me off somehow. This is not what I expected. In fact, when I looked at the show lineup, I was like, oh, that's disappointing. They're probably not going to do Inferno. Then again, Inferno would be too hard to do if you're going to try to follow children's television standards. So, okay, fine, whatever. They could have made this a two-parter, a three-parter. We could have treated this like the Dark Phoenix saga, which honestly, it very much is in that kind of category in terms of how it affects the story in the world. Even baby Nathan was around for a while before this actually happens. Inferno was a really cool, visually amazing story that was a huge build-up before it happened and really changed the status quo of X-Men afterwards. And they did it in one episode with very limited effect on how the story is going to progress. And I don't even know why you would do that when you could have done something really amazing with this. So I'm going to try to let my emotions calm down a bit, and let's explore episode 3 of X-Men 97. Oh, and spoiler warning or whatever. We pick up where the previous episode left off with a second Jean Grey showing up. We then go to the medical lab where Beast is scanning the DNA of both Jean Greys and discovers that the Jean Grey who just arrived is the real Jean Grey, while the Jean Grey who has been with them this whole time is actually the clone. However, the clone scans the original Jean Grey and finds that her memories are all confused and that Jean Grey's mind is a mess. So we're given this contradictory information. Immediately thereafter, Mr. Sinister contacts clone Jean Grey and she becomes Goblin Queen right off the bat. Then the only really good part of this entire episode happens as the entire Xavier Institute gets just taken over by weird monsters and visions. Everyone's freaking out. Characters are seeing their worst fears. They are losing their minds. And it leads to some cool fight stuff, including Cyclops using his optic blast to power up Bishop so Bishop can just blow away a bunch of monsters, which is pretty awesome. And then the rest of the episode happens. Essentially, the team realizes that clone Jean Grey went crazy, and they need to leave some people with regular Jean Grey in case she wakes up, which includes Wolverine for some reason. Which does bother me because when you're going to go fight Mr. Sinister, maybe having the dude of metal claws help you out would be a good idea. Instead, he gets to stay behind with Jean as well as Beast because he's at least a scientist. And the rest of the team goes off to fight at Mr. Sinister's mansion, which Morph remembers how to get there, which is a nice piece of continuity, including Morph warping back to his face where he was like evil Morph with the dark circles around his eyes, which I did appreciate the callback to that. When they're in the mansion place, they fight Madeline Pryor, and we get Magic showing up, which is really weird because nothing has established Magic as part of the team. I appreciate the cameo, and Magic was an important part of the Inferno story, and yet it feels really weird to have her here because we've never really established Magic as a character, or if we did, it must have been a very minor thing in one of the earlier seasons. Unlike seeing Psylocke fight in the background of a sequence, or Archangel fly by in a sequence, this is her actually having lines and trying to fight Madeline Pryor, or Goblin Queen, whatever you want to call her, and then kind of going evil for a brief moment before she's subdued. It's kind of a waste. It's like, hey, Magic was in the story, so we should put Magic here, and yet, she doesn't really do much, and she gets, taken care of really quick. Finally, it ends with Jean Grey waking up, having a psychic communication with Madeline Pryor, and Madeline Pryor essentially turning good, helping Scott defeat Mr. Sinister, and rescuing little baby Nathan Summers, who of course has the techno-organic virus and must go to the future alongside Bishop, which at least explains why Bishop was hanging out. I mean, yes, they made reference to his time device being damaged in the course of previous episodes, and they comment about how the device has been fixed, but has low battery power in this episode. Which I knew he was going to have to take Nathan into the future, but it's still one of those odd things where you could have done something to establish Bishop being trapped in the present, and not just have him randomly hanging out with the group. I mean, the ending is what the ending is supposed to be, with Nathan being infected with the virus, brought to the future, because then he'll become Cable and return to the present. And while I do appreciate that, it does, again, feel very, very rushed because you took what was a multi-issue arc and turned it into one episode and cut a whole lot of stuff out and forced things to just find resolution really quick. The very end of our episode, Forge appears. Yay! I love Forge. He's one of my favorite characters, and talks to Storm about trying to get her powers back. So yeah, we are going to do that arc. It'll be an interesting one to see how they translate that, or maybe they'll just resolve it in one episode, because why not? Let's just resolve everything in one episode. Why put out effort when we could not? It just dawned on me while editing this that they're probably going to do an episode dedicated to the adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. And again, it'll probably be one episode. And of any story they could compress into one episode, I guess I'm more fine with that one than I am on stories that actually have relevance to the greater world of X-Men. On the theme side of things, there really isn't much. There's a brief talk about family as Madeline Pryor is trying to figure out, who she really is, and Jean Grey is trying to regain her memories. And it's okay. Theme-wise, I can't really complain too much. I don't think they do a bad job, but there's nothing really heavy here. This is a lot more about the creepy visuals and trying to get as much story done in as short a time as possible. Last time I kind of complained about Jean Grey's voice. I'm going to go and take that back a little bit. I think I've gotten a little more used to her voice, and her Goblin Queen version of the voice is great. I love how evil it sounds. It is very evocative of Dark Phoenix from those episodes, and I think the actress does a good job with Jean Grey. She still sounds a little bit older than she's supposed to, but for the most part, I'm perfectly fine with it. Yay! It took a few episodes, but her Jean Grey sounds like Jean Grey. Bishop gets a lot more lines in this episode, and I think Bishop is fine. His acting seems to be pretty good. He has a deeper voice that works with his big build. And the "You're welcome" moment made me chuckle a bit. So, I like his performance, and I hope he's in future episodes. His character's in the title sequence, so I'm assuming he will be. On the visual side of things, we got some crazy stuff in the mansion, a bunch of weird-looking monsters. One of the creatures feels like it might be a reference to Akira, but I'm not entirely certain on that one. We get Rogue and Magneto looking very intimate together. I know they brought that up in a previous episode, but it's still in that category for me where I'm like, well, that would never be allowed in children's television. That looks a little too, I believe the word you're looking for is Rule 34. Thanks, random voice. And speaking of things that might be a little too hot for children's TV, the Goblin Queen. I know that there's no way they could have done the comic version because, children's television standards or Disney standards, either way, that's not gonna fly. So they did this outfit, which is very similar to her Black Queen of the Hellfire Club design, so I can't complain too much. Overall, the visuals have been remaining pretty good, and I think a lot of that is due to using the computer animation to the best that they can to try to make some of the crazy visuals when the Xavier Institute transforms into hell look as good as their budget will allow. Okay, I got a lot of things I gotta unpack here as I wrap up. First off, the children's television standards thing is a really interesting thing that I've been thinking about for this episode. Obviously, there's things that they probably wouldn't be able to get away with if this was 1997. The Rogue and Magneto holding each other there, the lines of teasing Gambit about what Rogue and Magneto might be doing together are obviously things that never would have flown in children's television. The horror sections and the weird-looking monsters, not a chance. Those never would have been able to. They'd have had to tone those down quite a bit. And of course, the usage of the word hell, which they never would have been able to get away with either. Like with the previous episodes, I'm able to kind of let that slide. On the one hand, the fact that we're not following children's television standards from 25 years ago is not a bad thing, because it at least allows the stories to be more in line with kind of the mature attitude that a lot of X-Men comics had. On the other hand, if this is supposed to be a continuation, it obviously wouldn't be allowed to ever air, or it would have had quite a bit of editing and changes to make it air. The other thing I noticed that I'm not really happy about is that this is the second episode in a row where Wolverine is not part of the big fight at the end. Wolverine was not there for the battle at Magneto's trial. He was watching it on TV and getting angry. He also is there with Jean Grey by her bedside instead of assisting in the fight against the Goblin Queen and trying to rescue Nathan. I understand that this allows other characters to show off their powers, but Wolverine was one of the biggest characters in the original show. He was in a lot of episodes, and everyone loved seeing him fight. Wolverine just kind of sitting around does not feel very Wolverine to me. And there's plenty of other characters who could have been by Jean's side. It doesn't need to be Wolverine. Now, yes, when Jean reads his mind and sees how he feels about her, that helps add to the love triangle arc that we're probably going to be playing through in the course of this season, and of course ties into previous love triangle stuff that occurred in previous seasons. But it also limits what Wolverine can do in terms of the action, which gets really annoying because you want to see Wolverine wreck some dudes, and they could have thrown some cannon fodder at Wolverine to fight while they're making their way through Mr. Sinister's base. In terms of scoring for this episode, I am too emotionally worked up. I've gone through my rubric multiple times, and I get different scores every time based on how angry I am or based on how much I'm weighing different aspects of the show. Overall, I think it scores somewhere between a 2 and a 4, and it's going to really be up to your taste. If you liked the original Inferno story, it's a 2. This is a terrible, terrible adaptation. If you never knew about that, the horror visuals and all the story stuff will push it probably close to a 4. I'm not going to average out the score this time. I'm just going to stick with that because, frankly, I don't even want to think about this episode. I want to get this review posted and move on with life. It is a technically good episode that really pissed me off, and I am hoping that we can get through other arcs without rushing them or without cutting out so much it barely feels like that arc. And I'm really worried for Storm and her depowered time period because I get the feeling we're going to resolve that in one episode. Thank you for watching. Please let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. Please like and subscribe so I know that people are enjoying watching these reviews. I'm not looking forward to next time, but I will be here next week yelling about this show, I promise. Until then, I'll see you at the tavern.